January 17th, 2024. 2:14 in the morning. Blackridge, Montana. Minus 32 degrees, with the wind driving it lower, hard enough to turn exposed skin white in minutes and stop a man's heart long before sunrise. The storm warning had told everyone to stay inside. The sheriff had ordered the cemetery gate chained before dark. The town had gone black 2 hours earlier when the power lines iced over and snapped in the canyon. But a retired Navy SEAL stood alone on the frozen ridge above town, facing his wife's grave while the blizzard came down around him like the mountain was trying to erase him. He had already lost the only person who ever made him feel human again. Now he had stepped into the one place in Blackridge people only visited in daylight, and only for the dead. Beside him, his white German shepherd wearing a tactical K9 jacket went suddenly rigid, ears forward, nose locked on the ground beneath the headstone. Then the dog started digging. Not curious digging. Not playful digging. The kind of violent, focused scraping a trained dog made when he had found something real. Ethan tried to pull him back, but the dog growled low in his throat and kept tearing into the frozen earth. That was when the first crack split through the grave. That was when Ethan understood the impossible truth. His wife was buried on top of something. And as the mountain disappeared behind a wall of white, he had one question burning colder than the storm itself. What had his dog sensed first beneath that headstone, and why had someone in Blackridge made sure it stayed hidden until now? Ethan Cole had spent the first 20 years of his life learning how to live in silence, and the next 20 learning how to survive inside it. Silence on a range before the first shot. Silence before a breach. Silence after the radio cut out and all that remained was instinct, breath, distance, and the narrow line between going home and becoming a flag folded over somebody else's shaking hands. He knew good silence. He knew useful silence. The silence standing over Mara's grave was either. It was the kind that crawled into a man's ribs and stayed there. The kind that had weight. The kind that made every lie spoken around it sound louder. Snow gathered on his shoulders and hat, and the bridge of his nose. He did not wipe it away. He stood with his gloved hands hanging at his sides, broad frame set against the headstone, eyes fixed not on Mara's name but on the earth around it, where Ghost had spent the past 3 weeks circling, sniffing, sitting, whining once, then staring so hard it was as if he could see through frozen dirt and old wood and 6 months of official explanations. Ethan had told himself it was scent memory. Dogs remembered in ways people never could. Ghost had lived with Mara, slept near the fireplace at her feet, followed her into the kitchen every morning because she always cut him one uselessly tiny strip of bacon and pretended she was sneaking it past Ethan even though they all knew the act by heart. The dog had watched her leave on the last morning too, watched her pull on her coat and scarf and kiss Ethan on the cheek and say she'd be back before the noon snow. Grief lived inside animals differently. That was what Ethan had told himself. But grief did not look like this. Ghost pawed harder, snow spraying backward in bursts. Then his claws hit something under the crust, a dull, unnatural sound. Ethan felt his spine lock. He stepped closer, the wind pushing into him sideways. Ghost! The dog did not stop. That alone was enough to split open the part of Ethan that had been trying very hard, for 6 long months, to act like a husband in mourning instead of the operator he had once been. Ghost had been trained out of a bloodline bred for military and search work, white coat bright as ice, chest deep, eyes sharp, mind quick, the kind of dog who learned 2 repetitions ahead and obeyed in chaos because chaos was where he understood the world best. Ethan had never needed to raise his voice to him. He did not now. He stepped in, hooked 2 fingers under the harness handle, and pulled. Ghost leaned into the grave and let out a low growl. Not at Ethan. At the ground. It was a terrible sound to hear in a cemetery at 2 in the morning, and not because it was animal. Because it was trained. Controlled. Intentional. Ethan had heard that exact note in collapsed compounds overseas. Underblown concrete. Outside hidden rooms. Near pressure plates. It was Ghost's warning tone, the one that said there was something here, and it did not belong. Ethan released the harness slowly and knelt beside the headstone. Snow had formed a raised lip against the granite base. He cleared it with one sweep of his glove and pressed into the earth. The cold went through the leather instantly, but that was not what made him hold his breath. The ground answered back hollow. He pressed again, farther left. Solid. He shifted right. Hollow. He looked at the headstone. Mara's name was half buried in blown snow, the dates clean, the carved cross sharp against the white. Nothing about it had ever felt right to him. He had hated this place the day they lowered her in, hated the way Sheriff Daniel Hargrove had taken charge of everything, hated the way the town had surrounded him with casseroles and eyes full of practiced sympathy, and the same neat sentence repeated in different voices. "I'm so sorry. It was such a tragic accident. The ridge gets dangerous in winter." She must have slipped. Must have. People who knew what happened never used the phrase must have. The wind surged harder. Branches creaked in the pines below the cemetery. The town of Blackridge was little more than a muted orange glow through the storm, where a few backup generators struggled behind frosted windows and one weak gas station light flickered down on Main. Ethan should have turned back then. Any sane man would have looked at the wide-out building around him, the way the trail was disappearing one drift at a time, and decided the grave could wait until dawn. Instead, he took the compact flashlight from his pocket and played the beam across the ground where Ghost had dug. The frozen surface shone back in uneven planes, and there, just beneath the crust, was the straight edge of wood. Not a coffin. Too high. Too shallow. Too recent. Ghost struck again with both front paws. The wood gave. A sharp crack split through the storm, and the earth under the headstone dropped. Ethan moved on instinct. He grabbed Ghost by the harness and threw his weight backward as the grave mouth collapsed inward, snow and rotten boards shearing away into darkness. One of Ethan's boots slid into the opening up to the thigh before he slammed onto his side and dragged himself free. The headstone listed, tilted, held by its foundation and little else. A deep exhale of stale, trapped air rolled out of the hole. Not grave air. Tunnel air. Ethan got to one knee and shoved the flashlight beam down. A vertical shaft dropped maybe 8 feet, then opened into a narrow passage cut through frozen soil and timbered on both sides with support beams. New beams. Not old grave wood, not collapsed cemetery fill, but shaped lumber, bolted. Ice glazed the walls. A cable ran along one side into the black. This was no animal den. No sinkhole. No old mining seam opening under winter movement. This had been built directly beneath Mara's grave. Ghost stood at the edge, body taut, eyes shining in the beam. He was not frightened. If anything, the dog looked vindicated. Ethan's face changed in a way only people who had served with him would have recognized. The grief did not leave. It hardened. Narrowed. Became function. He scanned the ridge line automatically. White. Trees. Fence. Grave markers. Blowing snow. No movement. Then he looked at his watch and judged distance, wind, probable closure on the road, blackout conditions if the ridge trail vanished entirely. If he went down into the tunnel now and something happened, there would be no one coming for him until daylight, if daylight came with the roads still open. He could go to the sheriff. He could call the county. He could photograph the shaft and come back with witnesses. He almost laughed. By sunrise this place would be filled, sealed, explained away. There would be a county snowcat somehow available. There would be maintenance records. There would be statements. And somewhere in all of that, the one chance he had to learn why his wife had been buried on top of a tunnel would disappear. He rose, moved to the cemetery fence, and looped a climbing rope around the iron post nearest the grave. He always carried rope in winter. Old habits. Remote habits. Montana habits. Seal habits. He checked the knot twice, clipped in, then shone the light down again. Ghost whined once and looked at him. "You stay on me," Ethan said quietly. The dog's tail gave one tight movement. Ethan went first, lowering himself into the shaft with boots braced against either wall until he reached the floor. The air below was colder but still, full of damp rot and old electricity. Ghost jumped cleanly after him, landing light, immediately dropping his nose to the dirt. Ethan swept the beam in a slow arc. The tunnel ran both directions. Left looked blocked by a cave-in maybe 10 yards down. Right bent away toward the ridge beneath the cemetery and, unless he was badly misjudging the angle, toward town. The cable followed that route. So did tracks. Not footprints. Boot marks, but smeared by movement and melt. Recent enough that the edges had not fully stiffened. Ghost faced right and growled again. Ethan drew a slow breath through his nose. He had not carried a sidearm to the cemetery. State laws were easy enough out here, but he had not wanted to stand over Mara's grave armed like he was on an op. So all he had was a field knife, compact flashlight, rope, lighter, phone with no signal, and the dog. Against the weather that was enough. Against men it might not be. He moved right. The passage narrowed after 15 feet, forcing him sideways past a brace. The supports were rough but recent, saw marks visible beneath the skin of frost. Whoever built this had done enough to keep it from dropping but not enough to last decades. Smuggling tunnel? Old prospector route reused? Utility access? The cable argued utility. The location beneath the grave argued something uglier, concealment disguised as grief. His boots sank slightly into damp earth where the frost had not penetrated. The smell intensified. Diesel. Mold. Metal. At 20 yards the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Ethan killed his light for 1 second and listened. Nothing but the groan of the mountain and the distant muffled rage of the storm above. He lit the chamber again. It had once been some kind of root cellar or old storage room cut into the ridge, then modified. Shelving lined one wall. Plastic tarps covered stacked crates. A portable generator sat silent in a corner beside 2 fuel cans and a workbench with tools laid out in neat rows. On the bench was a ledger book sealed in a freezer bag, a cheap digital radio, and a silver pendant. Ethan stopped moving. The pendant lay in the flashlight beam like a drop of moonlight. Oval. Tarnished silver. Small engraved lily at the center. Mara wore it almost every day. The room seemed to tilt, though it was Ethan's body reacting, not the mountain. He crossed the floor in 3 strides and picked it up with gloved fingers. Cold. Real. Glass broken. She had been here. Not maybe. Not must have. Here. Ghost stood near the far wall, sniffing at the baseboards. Ethan forced himself to set the pendant down and photographed the room quickly from 3 angles. Then he took the ledger. The first pages were columns of dates, initials, inventory numbers, coordinates. The entries meant nothing at first glance, but enough looked systematic to matter. Fuel. Medical. Cases. Weight. Delivery. Some pages had names, or fragments of names. Others had only symbols. Halfway through he found an envelope tucked inside the back cover. It was addressed in Mara's handwriting. If you find this, Ethan, I ran out of time. The words detonated in him without sound. For a second all he saw was her hand moving across legal pads at the kitchen table, the way she curled her lower lip inward when she concentrated, the way she laughed softly if she caught him watching her. He slid the single folded page from the envelope with hands that were suddenly less steady than they had been in firefights. I know you told me to let Blackridge be Blackridge and stop trying to save everybody from themselves. You were probably right. But I found something, and once I saw it I couldn't pretend I hadn't. Daniel knows. I'm almost sure he knows. If anything happens to me it was never an accident. There's a route under the cemetery and another under the old feed mill. They move people and product through the storm because nobody checks mountain roads in whiteout conditions. I have proof in the lockbox. Don't trust anyone who tells you to walk away. Especially not him. I'm sorry. I didn't want to drag your old life back over you, but if you're reading this, they already did. There was no signature. There did not need to be. Ethan closed his eyes once, hard enough to hurt, then opened them. He had spent half a year trying not to turn into the man grief wanted him to become. The man who searched every lie until he found something to break. The man who looked at every friendly face and saw motive. The man who knew institutions by the sound of their cover stories. Reading that page did not create that man. It released him. Ghost barked once. Ethan snapped the letter back into the envelope and turned. At the far end of the chamber, hidden behind stacked crates and a hanging tarp, was a steel lockbox bolted to the wall. He moved toward it and crouched. Combination dial. No obvious code. He checked the hinge, the bolts, the seams. Heavy, but not impossible. He could pry it with time. He did not have time. He thought of Mara. Anniversary dates. House number. Her birth year. Nothing about her was sentimental in that way. She was orderly, not romantic, practical, not theatrical. She would choose a code that meant something clear under stress. Ethan looked around the chamber again. Ledger entries. Dates. Fuel can labels. The generator. Nothing. Then he looked at the pendant on the bench. The engraving was a lily. Mara's mother's name had been Lillian. Mara's birthday was April 9th. Her mother had died on April 9th when Mara was 12. The date had folded into her life so completely she said it with a half-smile every year, and claimed one day she'd make peace with sharing a birthday with grief. Ethan turned the dial. 0-4-0-9. The lock clicked. His jaw set. Inside the box were 3 flash drives sealed in plastic, a folded county map with routes marked in red, 2 stacks of cash wrapped in banker bands, and a phone. Burner model. Battery removed. Under those was a second envelope. This one was not addressed. He opened it and found photographs. Men unloading crates from a snowcat at night near the old feed mill. A pickup backed up to a side entrance of the county clinic long after hours. Sheriff Hargrove standing beside 2 strangers Ethan did not know, one heavy in a parka, one slimmer, city coat, shaved head. In the last photograph Mara herself had taken a reflection shot in the dark window of some building, using the glass to frame a hidden room inside. On the table in that room were passports. Many of them. Ethan stared at the passports until the cold in his body became anger. Not drugs only then. Not simple theft. Product and people. Through winter routes. During storms. Under the cemetery and the feed mill. Smuggling in whiteout country because law enforcement could blame weather for every delay and mountain isolation for every disappearance. Mara had found it. Mara had written him. Mara had died. He had known before this moment that Sheriff Hargrove had lied to him. He had not known the size of the lie. Ghost moved away from the wall and came to Ethan's side, pressing his shoulder briefly into Ethan's knee. Ethan touched the dog's neck once without looking at him. Good boy. It came out rougher than he intended. He reassembled the lockbox exactly as he had found it, except for the smallest flash drive, which he slipped into the inner pocket of his jacket, and the letter, which he folded flat against his chest. He left the phone. Too traceable, maybe monitored. The photographs he restacked and photographed with his own phone. The map he memorized in 10 seconds and put back. The smart move now was to leave. He knew that. Go home. Duplicate the images. Drive at first light to the state office in Helena or the federal field office in Billings or somewhere outside county control. Do not confront Hargrove. Do not tip the hand. Do not become part of whatever Blackridge had been keeping alive under the snow. Then Ghost stiffened again and turned toward a narrow side passage Ethan had not yet inspected. There are moments when a man chooses the version of himself he can still live with. Ethan could walk away from that side passage and perhaps do everything correctly and perhaps survive. But if there was someone down there, if Ghost had alerted the way he had on the grave because he smelled life, then leaving would become its own verdict. Ethan rose and followed the dog. The side passage sloped downward, tighter than the main tunnel, forcing him to bow his head under the braces. The air changed. Less diesel. More rot. More breath. At 15 feet he heard something over the mountain's low groan. A sound. So faint he thought it was a trick of memory first. Then again. A human cough. Ghost surged ahead. Easy. They rounded the bend into a room the size of a pantry, walls rough-cut, floor damp. In the corner sat a young woman wrapped in 2 wool blankets, wrists free but red from old restraints, eyes wide and bloodshot in the flashlight beam. Beside her crouched a teenage boy, maybe 15, maybe younger, too thin for the coat he wore, one side of his face swollen purple from a hit. They flinched at the light. The boy tried to put himself in front of the woman, and nearly fell over doing it. Ethan lowered the beam immediately and angled it to the floor. I'm not with them. Neither moved. Ghost stepped in front of Ethan and sat. The woman's breathing changed. Not calm, but hope trying very hard not to embarrass itself. She said something in accented English he did not catch. I'm here to help, Ethan said. How many? Her eyes flicked to the ceiling, then to the tunnel, then back. 2 more. Up. They took one. Who took one? Big man. Beard. Sheriff. She swallowed. Please. Ethan's face did not move, but the room inside him shifted again. How long have you been here? The boy answered this time. 3 days. Maybe 4. Can you walk? The woman nodded. The boy did too quickly. Ethan looked past them and saw another sealed door, metal, on the back wall. Storage room? Holding room? Escape route? He did not check it first. People first. He crouched to eye level. Listen to me. There's a blizzard overhead, and this tunnel leads under the cemetery. I can get you out if you do exactly what I say. No noise. No questions until we move. Understand? The boy looked at Ghost. Dog? He listens better than most people. So should you. The boy gave a tiny, disbelieving nod. The woman said, There are cameras. Ethan glanced up and spotted one cheap dome in the corner, blacked out. No red light. If the generator was off, maybe the cameras were too. Maybe not. Working? I don't know. He made the decision fast. The grave shaft was one route. But if anyone had been due to come through the chamber, leading captives that way might walk them directly into a pickup team. Better to learn the layout. He checked the metal door. Unlocked. Behind it was a stair cut upward into darkness. A second way out. The old feed mill, Mara had written. Ghost looked up the stairs and bared his teeth. Ethan heard boots. Not imagination. Not settling boards. Boots descending. He closed the door silently and looked at the woman and boy. Back corner. Stay down. If he opens this door, do not move until I tell you. The woman shook instantly. The boy pulled her back. Ethan took position to the hinge side, knife out, beam off. Ghost stood at his knee, body low, ready. Ethan counted the steps by sound. 1 man. Heavy enough. Slow but not cautious. Someone who believed the storm and the mountain did half his security for him. The latch moved. The door opened inward. A flashlight beam cut across the room where the 2 captives had been sitting and found only blankets. The man behind it had time to say, What the? Ghost hit him at the wrist. The flashlight clattered. Ethan drove into the doorway, one hand covering the man's mouth, the other burying the knife high under the parka seam just below the ribs, up and in, silent and hard. The man convulsed once. Ethan held him until the fight left his body, then lowered him carefully to the floor. Not sheriff. Beard, yes, but younger, heavier shoulders, cheap cologne under sweat and wool. Ethan took his sidearm, spare magazine, radio, and keys. He dragged the body inside and shut the door. The woman had both hands over her mouth. The boy stared as if seeing Ethan clearly for the first time. Can you walk now? Ethan asked. They both nodded. He checked the radio volume and clipped it to his coat. Then he eased the stair door open and listened. Faint generator hum. No voices near. He led them up 20 steps to a hatch and stopped. The hatch opened into the old feed mill office, dark except for one emergency lantern on a desk. Ethan had known the building all his life. It sat on the edge of town near the rail spur that had been dead for years, boarded windows, roof sagging, the kind of place kids dared each other to enter in summer and adults ignored in winter. Perfect. He moved them into the office, closed the hatch, and checked the room. Filing cabinets. Rotten desk. Space heater dead. Through the cracked blinds he could see the loading yard half buried in drifting snow, and beyond it, the sheriff's SUV angled under the awning, engine off but still warm enough to hold a little hood steam. Another vehicle sat farther back, a utility truck with county plow markings. No one in sight. He turned to the captives. Names. The woman hesitated. Anna. The boy said. Mateo. Any injuries I need to know about? She pointed to Mateo's ribs. Kick. He breathes but pain. Mateo shook his head like it didn't matter. Where are the others? Below. One old man. One girl. Age? 17 maybe. That matched the number she had whispered. Ethan looked at the storm yard, then at the hatch. He could get Anna and Mateo out right now by taking the sheriff's SUV and running south while he still had surprise. But the old man and the girl would remain below, and if Hargrove or one of his men discovered the body missing from the chamber, the first thing they would do was clear the remaining witnesses. The decision hurt because it was dangerous, not because it was unclear. He stripped the dead man's radio earpiece and put it in. You two stay here. Lock the office door after me. If anyone but me comes in, hide behind the cabinets and do not make a sound. If I don't come back in 20 minutes, take that hatch back down, follow the tunnel to the grave shaft, climb the rope, and go north through the cemetery fence. There's a cabin half a mile along the ridge. Mine. Generator, food, blankets. Understand? Anna looked at him as if he had said something impossible. You go back? Yes. For us? No, Ethan said, and for the first time in 6 months there was iron in his voice instead of grief. For my wife. He left before the answer could become anything sentimental. Back in the tunnel, Ghost ranged a step ahead. Ethan kept the stolen sidearm low and moved through the chamber to the main passage. The radio crackled once with static, then a voice. Cal, you there? Ethan said nothing. Cal, answer. A second voice farther back, maybe through another radio, muttered something lost in static. Ethan clipped the radio off. He found the two remaining captives in a second holding space another 40 yards down, both conscious, both frightened, the older man with frostbitten fingertips black at the edges and the girl too exhausted to stand until Ghost nosed her hand and made her blink like waking from deep water. He got their names too, Lev and June, and learned in broken pieces what Mara had probably already known. Blackridge's winter routes were used to move undocumented workers, debt migrants, and sometimes runaways, mixed in with stolen meds, diesel, and whatever else the storm could hide. Some were kept only overnight. Some longer. Lev had seen one man taken out coughing blood and never return. June had been promised restaurant work in Spokane and instead arrived in Montana handcuffed in a van after changing vehicles twice on back roads. Ethan did not tell them what he was thinking because naming evil too soon can turn fear into paralysis. He just got them moving. The hard part was not getting 4 weakened people through the tunnel. It was getting them out before whoever remained topside noticed the break in routine. They were halfway to the feed mill office when the generator cut on somewhere farther up the line and bare bulbs in the chamber flashed weak yellow. Ghost stopped. Ethan cursed inwardly and pushed everyone against the wall behind the stacked crates just as voices approached from the main passage. 2 men. One said, "Why is the box open?" The other answered, "Cal, you stupid son of a—" The first man rounded the crate stack and saw Ethan at the same moment. Ethan fired twice. Suppressed weapons are a movie lie. Real gunfire in a tunnel is a fist to the skull. The first shot took the man high in the chest, slammed him backward. The second hit the second man in the shoulder because he twisted, and then Ghost launched through the noise and disappeared into him. Screaming in a tunnel sounds worse than on open ground because there is nowhere for it to go. Ethan closed distance and hit the wounded man across the temple with the pistol, but until he dropped. The captives were crying now, even the boy trying not to. "Move!" Ethan snapped. That voice worked because it was not a request. They moved. The office was too exposed now, so Ethan changed plan on the run. He took them through the yard door instead and into the full force of the storm. Wind hit like impact. June nearly went down. Ethan tied Anna and June together with spare rope, looped the line to Lev, then clipped the end to Ghost's harness and pointed north, toward the slope under the cemetery. "Cabin," he told the dog. Ghost hesitated exactly one heartbeat, reading him. "Take them." That was all. The dog turned into the wideout and began pulling, not running wild but choosing ground, staying low, ears flattened, a moving point of certainty in chaos. Ethan watched long enough to see the line tighten behind him and the shapes of the people follow. Then he went back toward the mill. He did not do it because it was wise. He did it because the lockbox, the photographs, the ledger, the routes, the truth of Mara's last weeks, all of it was still below, and if Hargrove reached that chamber before Ethan did, the story would die again. The yard was empty except for snow driving off the awning and sheets. Ethan reached the sheriff's SUV, checked the back seat, glove box, center console. Flares, emergency blankets, county paperwork, a shotgun. He took the shotgun and shells. Then the radio on the dash hissed with a clear voice. "Daniel, answer me." Not Daniel's voice. Male. Flat. Used to command. No local drawl. Ethan pressed transmit once and said nothing. "Who is this?" Ethan let go. Silence. Then, very quietly, "Find him." "Good. Let them know fear." He headed back inside through the loading bay instead of the office, moving along the catwalk above the main floor. The mill smelled of old grain, mouse rot, and cold steel. Snow had blown through broken panes and crusted the machinery white. 2 flashlight beams swung below. Men searching. One of them called Hargrove by name. So the sheriff was not here yet, or was somewhere else in the building. Ethan tracked their path, used the storm-slammed wall sounds to mask his movement, and dropped behind the nearer man as he passed beneath the stairs. The shotgun butt to the back of the skull took him down with a wet grunt. The second man spun, firing once wild. The round punched into sheet metal near Ethan's shoulder and kicked sparks. Ethan fired the shotgun center mass. The blast threw the man into the conveyor housing and left the room ringing. He moved before the echo died, knowing Hargrove would now have exact location. The hatch room was lit brighter than before. The lockbox still sat open. Someone had searched the bench. The pendant was gone. Ethan stopped. He looked around once, slowly. If Hargrove had found the room after hearing shots, he would not take evidence and then stand around admiring it. He would move to leave or move to kill. Ethan switched his light off and stepped back into shadow. A voice came from the passage behind him. "You should have stayed buried in your own grief, Ethan." Sheriff Daniel Hargrove did not sound winded or angry. He sounded disappointed, which in some men is worse. Ethan turned slightly, shotgun low. Hargrove stood 20 feet away with a revolver in one hand and Mara's silver pendant in the other. He was broad and heavy in his sheriff's winter coat, gray beard iced with melt, eyes small and cold and unsurprised. Ghost was not with Ethan. That fact mattered. Hargrove looked past him into the room. "Where are the others?" "Safe." A faint smile. "You think so?" "I know so." The sheriff twitched the pendant between 2 fingers. "She was like that too. Thought knowing something made her safe." Ethan felt the pulse in his neck. "You killed her." "No. Your wife got herself killed. There's a difference." Outside, the storm hammered the ridge like artillery. Hargrove glanced at the tunnel ceiling. "You know what your problem is, Cole? You think every ugly thing is a conspiracy. Sometimes winter's just winter. Sometimes a smart woman slips. Sometimes lonely men need the world to be darker than it is because otherwise they have to face plain bad luck. And sometimes a county sheriff hides tunnels under a cemetery. The smile left Hargrove's face. You retired from killing men and thought you could come here and judge people who stayed and built something. This town was dying. Mills close. Rail dies. Tourists don't come in January. People freeze. People starve. Then the storm routes started paying. Medicine. Diesel. Labor. Favors. Cash. You call it ugly because you had a penchant to hide behind. I call it what it is because my wife found your ledger. Hargrove's eyes changed at that, not in guilt, but irritation. Your wife didn't know when to stop. Neither do I. The sheriff raised the revolver half an inch. That much I believe. There are conversations men have while deciding if the other one will live long enough to finish the sentence. Ethan watched Hargrove's shoulders, muzzle line, hand tension. The sheriff watched the shotgun and measured his own first shot chances. Both knew the tunnel would make the outcome brutal and close. Both also knew any delay increased the odds of interruption. What broke the stalemate was not either man. It was Ghost. The dog came from darkness behind Hargrove without sound and hit him high between shoulder and neck. The revolver fired into the ceiling. Dirt and frost rained down. Hargrove roared and twisted, slamming backward into the support wall, trying to tear the dog off. Ethan closed the distance in 3 strides and drove the shotgun stock into Hargrove's wrist until the revolver dropped, then into his jaw. Bone cracked. The sheriff fell to one knee and reached for the knife on his belt with his free hand. Ethan kicked it away and shoved him flat. Ghost held until Ethan gave the command to release. Hargrove lay on his back in the dirt, blood dark under the beard, one side of his face already swelling. He spat red and laughed once. You think this ends with me? Ethan bent, took the pendant from his hand, and slid it into his pocket. No, he said. It starts with you. He zip-tied the sheriff's wrists with cuffs from the duty belt, then his ankles. Hargrove kept smiling through blood. You won't make it down the mountain. Maybe. They'll close the road. They already did. You think state boys care? Federal? Snow falls, files get lost. People disappear every winter. Ethan leaned closer. Then I'll drag you out myself. Hargrove looked at him for a long second and saw he meant it. Then the sheriff said something Ethan had not expected. You're too late anyway. A burst of static from the abandoned radio on the bench answered for him, followed by a voice. Female. Frightened. Daniel? We got a problem at Cole's place. Ethan went cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. The cabin. Anna. Mateo. June. Leviticus Ghost was already moving before Ethan was. Ethan grabbed the flash drives from the lockbox, the ledger, the photographs, all of it shoved into a canvas sack hanging by the bench. He slung it across his body, hauled Hargrove halfway upright by the coat, and dragged him into the side room, locking him behind the metal door just long enough to buy minutes. Then he ran. The route to his cabin from the mill yard was shorter over the cemetery ridge than by road, but in this storm, shorter could also mean lost. Ethan took it anyway with Ghost guiding ahead, white coat barely visible in the whiteout. Snow hit his face like thrown sand. The wind stole breath right out of his mouth. More than once the ridge disappeared under him and only the dog's movement kept him pointed true. He used terrain memory, tree-lined shapes, fence posts under drifts, the old operator's trick of triangulating through absence when visibility failed. Halfway up he found blood in the snow. Not much. Drops. Then a drag patch. Ghost stopped and barked once toward the trees. Ethan cut left and found Mateo behind a fallen pine, trying to hold a flare gun in shaking hands while blood leaked through his sleeve. Anna crouched over him. June sat against the trunk with Lev beside her. All alive. None safe. What happened? Anna's answer broke in the wind. 2 men. Dog attacked one. We ran. One shot the boy. Where? Mateo pulled his coat aside. Flesh crease high on the arm. Through or grazing. Painful, bleeding, survivable. Ethan tore fabric, packed snow around the cloth dressing first to slow surface bleed, then used a pressure wrap from the SUV kit he had shoved into his pocket without realizing why. Lev said the other man had gone around toward the cabin's side to cut them off. Ethan looked at the slope. His cabin sat another 300 yards up on a shelf of rock beneath a stand of pines, small but reinforced, built for harsh winters and solitude, with a generator shed and enough supplies to hold one man and one dog through a week-long closure. If one of Hargrove's men had gotten there first, he could wait in cover and pick them off as they approached. If Ethan bypassed the cabin entirely and tried to lead the group south to town, he'd be walking wounded people into open wideout with no shelter and no certainty of not running straight into another search team. The mountain had shrunk his options exactly the way Hargrove had counted on. Ghost looked uphill, teeth showing. "There," Ethan said. The dog lunged into the storm. The sound came 3 seconds later. A man shouting, then a scream cut short. Ethan moved the group behind the fallen pine, handed Anna the stolen pistol, and took the shotgun up the slope. He followed the noise around the generator shed and found a deputy on his back in the drift with Ghost standing over him, blood on the white fur around his muzzle. The deputy still had a knife in one hand and terror in both eyes. He looked younger than Ethan expected. Maybe 26. Maybe just stupid enough to choose the wrong loyalty in the wrong town. "Please," he gasped. "Please get him off me." "Who's with you?" "No one. I swear. Lie again and I leave him." The deputy sobbed once, breath frosting red. "Just me. Daniel called everybody to the mill. Said stop the witnesses if they ran." Ethan stared at him. "Witnesses?" The deputy looked away. That told Ethan enough. He cuffed the man to the generator pipe and left him there with one blanket and a warning that if he tried to move, Ghost would hear it before Ethan did. Inside the cabin, the cold was less murderous but not by much. The generator still worked. Ethan got it running, then lit the main room with yellow lamps that made everyone look more fragile than before. He set Anna to heating broth, Lev near the stove, June wrapped in blankets on the couch, Mateo on the table where Ethan could bandage the arm properly. Ghost paced the door, then windows, then returned to sit facing the room like a pale sentry. Only after the first wave of survival tasks was handled did Ethan allow himself 10 seconds to breathe. Mara's cabin scarf still hung from the chair by the fireplace. He had not moved it since she died. Anna noticed him looking. "Your wife?" He nodded. "She tried to help us?" "Yes." Anna swallowed and looked at the scarf too, as if trying to imagine the woman who had risked enough to leave a note in a tunnel. "Then we help finish." Ethan almost said no. Civilians, wounded, terrified, smuggled through snow, should not be enlisted into a dead woman's unfinished war. But reality had passed that point. They were already in it. He spread the county map from the lockbox on the table and weighed the corners with soup cans. The routes in red connected the cemetery, feed mill, clinic rear lot, rail spur sheds, and a maintenance road leading west through the pass that was officially closed all winter. He had one flash drive from the box, photographs on his phone, the ledger, and a living sheriff in cuffs below the mill. He also had a mountain storm, limited fuel, and no certainty that anyone above county level would receive the evidence before Hargrove's partners cleaned house. Then June, voice hoarse from cold and fear, said the thing that broke the puzzle. "There was a woman at the clinic." Ethan looked up. "She was nice to me," June said. "Not with them. She gave me water when they stopped. She said if I ever saw a man with a dog and sad eyes, tell him not to trust the storm route after dawn." Anna frowned. "What?" June closed her eyes, trying to remember. "She said they moved the last shipment after dawn because that's when people think the storm is done." Ethan leaned in. "What woman?" "Nurse, maybe. Red hair. Freckles." Mara had once mentioned a nurse at the clinic she liked. Claire Bennett. Outsider. Divorced. Smart enough to hate local corruption but quiet enough to survive it. Not trust the storm route after dawn. That meant there would be a final movement. Evidence, people, product, money. Whoever needed to vanish before roads opened and outside agencies could get curious. Hargrove had said Ethan was too late. Maybe because by dawn everything would be gone. Ethan checked the clock. 3:11. A blizzard can make an hour feel like a night, and a night feel like a winter. Dawn was not far. He looked at the group around the table. Lev barely upright. June exhausted. Mateo hurt but game. Anna steadier than all of them. None fit for another long push downhill unless they had to. He made the decision with the same ruthless practicality he once used to assign breach stacks. We hold here till first light. Then I go to the clinic. Anna started to argue. Ethan raised a hand. If Claire Bennett is real and still alive, she either has more evidence or she dies before sunrise. The roads won't open before 8 if this wind holds. I can make the clinic and back if I cut through the cemetery and lower spur. Lev shook his head. They kill you. Maybe. That is not a plan. It is tonight. Mateo, pale with pain, managed a weak grin. Dog is the plan. For the first time in months, something like a smile touched Ethan's face and vanished. Ghost, hearing himself discussed, thumped his tail once without taking his eyes off the window. The next hour stretched with the painful slowness of waiting under threat. Ethan cleaned blood from the dog's fur. Ghost bore it with offended patience until Ethan found the shallow cut on his flank and sterilized it. June fell asleep sitting up. Lev muttered prayers under his breath in Russian or Ukrainian or some borderland mix Ethan could not place. Anna drank broth and then insisted on washing the blood from the floorboards where Mateo had dripped. Ethan let her because people need tasks when fear would otherwise own them. At 3:48, headlights crawled across the trees outside and stopped down the slope. Every body in the room went still. Ethan killed the lamps instantly, leaving only stove glow. Ghost rose without sound. No engine idle. Whoever it was had cut power and parked low. A cautious knock came 3 minutes later. Not sheriff's men, Ethan thought immediately. Too careful. Too patient. He approached the door from the side and called. Say my wife's name. A woman's voice from outside, barely above the wind. Mara Cole. And if you're really Ethan, open the damn door before I lose my toes. He opened. Claire Bennett stood on the threshold wrapped in a parka too light for the storm and carrying a medical bag in one hand and a hard drive case in the other. Red hair escaped from under her knit cap in frozen strands. Her face was raw with cold and fear. Behind her, a clinic Subaru sat half buried in drift under the pines. She stepped in, saw the people, saw Ghost, saw Ethan, and for 1 second all the things she had probably rehearsed vanished from her face, and she looked only tired. You found it, she said. I found enough. She held up the drive case. Then you haven't found this. Ethan took it but did not yet open it. How long were you helping my wife? Claire's eyes moved to the scarf on the chair and back to him. Long enough to know she was braver than either of us. That answer earned half a breath of trust. Claire explained in quick, clipped detail while warming her hands over the stove. Mara had first noticed unusual clinic supply discrepancies in late November, then cross-checked them with county maintenance fuel orders and discovered patterns that made no sense. Storm nights? Lost inventory. After-hours arrivals. Hargrove leaning on clinic staff to keep certain logs off-book. Claire had helped copy files, hide records, and identify patients who were never real patients at all, just injured men passing through the route. They had planned to take everything to Helena after New Year's, but Mara went missing the day before they were supposed to leave. Hargrove called it a slip on the ridge before anyone officially knew where she had fallen. Why didn't you come to me? Ethan asked. Claire looked at him the way only someone telling the truth at personal cost can. Because you looked like a man 1 inch from breaking in half. And because Mara made me promise that if anything happened, I would wait until I had enough that they couldn't bury you too. He could hate that answer and still know it was reasonable. What's on the drive? Clinic records. Vehicle logs. Security downloads. There's video too. Of what? Claire's face closed. Of Mara being brought in after they found her. Silence took the room. Ghost went to Ethan and leaned against his leg. Claire swallowed. She wasn't dead when they brought her to the clinic. Something inside Ethan became very still. No one spoke for several seconds. Even the storm outside felt farther away. Say it all, Ethan said. Claire did. Mara had been conscious on arrival, hypothermic and with head trauma but alive. Claire had tried to stabilize her. Hargrove had entered with 2 men and ordered everyone out except him. Claire had refused. One of the men pushed her against the wall and took her phone. When she got back in the room minutes later, Mara had coded. The chart was altered. Time of death changed. Claire had copied what she could before they scrubbed the system. She had been living terrified ever since. June made a sound like a person hearing the shape of evil and finally recognizing it. Ethan did not move. He had seen death often enough not to romanticize revenge. Revenge rarely restored anything. It usually just scattered the ruins wider. But there is a distinct line between losing someone and having them taken, and once a man knows which side of that line he stands on, the whole world changes shape. Claire opened the drive case on the table. There's a satellite hotspot too. Old, but if you get enough sky and enough patience, maybe you can push files out before morning. Hope, then. Small, ugly, technical hope. Ethan checked the clock. 4:22. They built the plan around what they had because that was all any decent plan ever is. Anna and Lev would stay with June and Mateo in the cabin. Claire would help Ethan transmit copies from the ridge behind the cabin where tree cover broke enough for a satellite lock. If the upload failed, Ethan would take the hard evidence and Claire would drive south by dawn in the clinic Subaru while he created enough trouble at the West Maintenance Road to keep the route from clearing. Ghost would stay with Ethan. On that point there was no debate, not because Ethan insisted, but because the dog had already decided. At 4:51 they climbed behind the cabin into wind that felt sharper than broken glass. Claire set the hotspot on a rock shelf under a clear patch of sky while Ethan fed files from the flash drive and her case into a ruggedized laptop she had somehow kept working under all this. The upload crawled, stalled, resumed. 1 bar. Then none. Then 1 again. Ethan kept his body between the device and the wind while Ghost faced downhill toward the dark shape of town. At 5:06 Ghost growled. Headlights. 3 sets this time, moving slow through the trees on the lower access road. Hargrove's people had found the deputy, or the feed mill, or the tunnel, or all 3. Claire whispered. How many? Enough. He checked the upload. 20%. Not enough. He looked at the tree line, the approaching beams, the narrow ridge, the fragile little cone of signal that might mean state investigators seeing the truth before the mountains swallowed it. Keep it running, he told Claire. What are you doing? Buying time. He went down to the cabin, loaded the ledger and the rest of the drives into a waterproof bag, stuffed extra shells into his coat, and took one final look at the room Mara had made warm once by the simple act of existing in it. Then he stepped back into the storm with Ghost at his side and headed downhill to meet the men coming through the pines, because sometimes surviving winter means finding shelter, and sometimes it means becoming the thing the storm itself cannot bury. The first vehicle stopped 30 yards out, lights blinding on purpose. Ethan moved off axis before the passenger door opened. A voice called through a bullhorn, absurd in the wilderness and therefore somehow more sinister. Ethan Cole. This is county law enforcement. Step out unarmed. Ethan laughed once under his breath. Ghost's hackles lifted. A second voice from another vehicle shouted. Sheriff says you're making this worse. The sheriff says a lot of things, Ethan called back. Snow blew in curtains between them. Men moved behind doors. Tactical enough to want cover, sloppy enough to think numbers would solve what terrain and training might not. Then, from the third vehicle, a familiar voice rang out. Ethan! It's me. He knew it before he placed it. Pastor Tom Weller from the church on Main, the man who had presided over Mara's funeral. Tom had brought Stu to the house after she died and said little, which had made him one of the few town figures Ethan had not wanted to throw out. Hearing him here made the whole night feel more corrupted. "What are you doing with them?" Ethan shouted. A pause. Then Tom answered, misery plain even through wind. "Trying to stop blood. That ship sailed." Tom took a few steps into the light, palms out. "Listen to me. Daniel says you have people from the route? If that's true, let me take them. I'll make sure they get out." "By which road?" Tom had no answer. There are betrayals born of greed and betrayals born of fear. Ethan could tell, even now, that Tom was the second kind. It did not make him safe. "You buried my wife," Ethan said. Tom's face changed. "I buried what they told me to bury." "Exactly?" A shot cracked from the far left before the pastor could say another word. Not from Ethan. Someone impatient. Someone scared. The round hit a tree 3 feet from Ethan's shoulder. Ghost lunged toward the muzzle flash. The night exploded. Ethan fired twice toward the left beam and moved hard right, using the drift berm as cover while Ghost vanished into white chaos. Men shouted. One dropped. Another screamed and went down behind the truck, clawing at his face where the dog had hit him. Tom threw himself flat. More rounds tore branches overhead. Ethan worked by flashes, muzzle report, angle, memory of the slope. He was not hunting heroes. He was breaking momentum. It worked. What county men understand in offices they often forget in storms: numbers don't matter if nobody knows where the threat is. Ethan kept changing position, firing from one snow bank then another, letting the wide-out distort distance. He hit a headlight with one shot and plunged half the slope into darkness. A second vehicle reversed in panic and slid sideways into a pine. Someone yelled that Ghost was in the trees. Good. From the ridge above, faint but real, the hotspot light changed color. Upload complete. Claire blew a whistle once, sharp and high through the storm. Ethan heard it and knew. Now all he had to do was live long enough for morning to matter. That was when a snowcat engine growled to life somewhere west of the cabin, low and monstrous, climbing through the woods on the maintenance route Mara had marked in red. The final shipment. Hargrove had not lied about being too late. While county men pinned Ethan on the ridge, the real operation was moving. He looked through the storm and saw it at last, huge under caked ice, tracks chewing through drifts, cab lights dimmed, cargo trailer hitched behind. Heading for the West Pass before dawn. Ghost reappeared out of the blowing white and skidded to Ethan's side, chest heaving, fur stained with fresh blood that was not his. Ethan looked from the snowcat to the cabin ridge where Claire had sent the files, then down to the trapped county vehicles, then to the narrow cut that would let him intercept the maintenance road. This was the break point. The place where part one of the night ended and the rest of it would decide whether Mara got justice or another grave full of lies. He put one hand on Ghost's harness, leaned close so the dog could hear over the engine and wind, and said the 2 words that had carried them through worse than Montana. Find them. Ghost launched first, a white blur vanishing into a storm that had gone from deadly to almost deliberate, as if the mountain itself had chosen a side and wanted the truth dragged out of Blackridge before dawn could bury it again. Ethan went after him at a hard diagonal through the trees, boots sinking past the ankles, one hand tight on the shotgun, the other keeping the canvas evidence bag cinched against his body under his coat. Behind him, the shouts near the cabin thinned as county men realized too late they had been used as noise while the rail cargo moved west. The snowcat's engine kept grinding through the dark like some iron beast chewing a path across the pass, and that sound settled everything inside Ethan. This was the route. This was the last move. Whatever Sheriff Hargrove had built beneath the town, whatever Mara had died trying to expose, it was all funneling into that machine now, trying to slip through the storm before daylight made outside eyes possible. The slope dropped sharply into a gully choked with pines, and Ethan took it fast anyway, sliding the last 10 feet on one knee, catching himself against the trunk hard enough to jar his shoulder. Ghost was already ahead, barking once, not randomly but with direction. Ethan angled toward the sound and broke out onto the old maintenance road, little more than a buried cut in the mountain with one set of fresh track marks biting deep through the drifts. The snowcat had passed less than a minute before. Ethan could feel the churned heat rising faintly from the shredded snow, smelled diesel on the air beneath the cold. He crouched, touched the track, then looked west. The road bent around a granite outcrop toward the pass. If the machine reached the shelf above the canyon, it would have downhill momentum, and too much open ground for Ethan to close it cleanly. He had to stop it before then. Ghost reappeared out of the white and planted himself in the road, head turned uphill, ears forward. Ethan followed the line of the dog's gaze and saw movement through the trees above him. One man, maybe two, parallel to the road, using the upper slope as cover. Rear security. Not county rookies this time. The spacing was too good. The pace too controlled. Ethan dropped behind the berm as the first shot cracked over the road where his chest had been a second earlier. Snow exploded off the cut bank. A second round hit a pine trunk and sent bark into his face. Ghost flattened instantly and disappeared from sight. Ethan rolled left, found the shooter's muzzle flash through the branches, and fired once. The shotgun blast shattered the tree line and bought silence, not because he knew he'd hit the man, but because nobody keeps an easy sight picture after 12-gauge tears the dark apart 6 feet from where they're hiding. The second man moved lower, trying to flank. Ethan heard him before he saw him, boots losing purchase on crusted snow for half a second. He pivoted, drew the stolen sidearm, and fired twice through the brush. A body crashed downslope through dead branches and stopped with a sound too heavy to fake. Then Ghost snarled somewhere close, followed by a human cry that rose sharp and broke off. Ethan did not waste time checking. He pushed back into the road and ran west. The pass narrowed ahead between black walls of rock glazed in ice. The snowcat's engine echoed there now, louder, slower. Climbing. Ethan rounded the granite outcrop and saw the machine 50 yards ahead, its tracks grinding over buried stone, trailer fishtailing in the wind. A man rode on the back platform with a rifle slung across his chest, scanning behind. Ethan dropped flat as the guard turned, then crawled to the edge of the cut and measured distance through blowing white. Too far for the shotgun to do anything meaningful unless he got lucky. Too close to let it vanish. He looked around for terrain, for weakness, for anything the mountain might give him. To the left of the road, above the machine, a cornice shelf of drift had built up beneath an overhang, unstable as glass. One good shock might drop it. Maybe enough snow to block the road. Maybe enough to bury the cab. Or maybe not. But maybe was all he had. He slung the shotgun, pulled a road flare from the sheriff's SUV kit still jammed in his pocket, struck it alive against the frozen rock, and threw it high into the drift shelf. Red fire arced through the white and vanished. For 1 second nothing happened. Then the flare's heat and impact disturbed something already waiting to fall. The shelf shuddered. A crack ran across it like a wound opening in the mountain. Ethan lunged behind the granite as the overhang let go. Snow came down in a roaring sheet, not a full avalanche, but enough to slam into the road with the force of a breaking wall. The snowcat's driver hit the throttle too late. The front blade nosed into the collapse, tracks spinning, trailer jackknifing sideways. The rear guard was thrown off the platform and rolled under the berm screaming. The machine lurched, buried to the midline in churned powder and rock, engine still snarling but no longer moving forward. Ethan was on his feet before the sound finished echoing. He reached the thrown guard first. The man was alive, stunned, trying to unsling the rifle from under his body. Ethan kicked it away and put a boot on his wrist. "How many in the cab?" The guard spat blood into the snow and smiled at him with broken confidence. "Enough." Ghost came out of the drift and stood over the man's throat. The smile vanished. "Two," he gasped. "Driver and Ortiz." "Cargo?" The guard hesitated exactly 1 beat too long. Ethan pressed harder. Ghost showed teeth. "People," the guard blurted. "And records." "Money." "Of course." "Final evacuation." "Witnesses, paper, profit." Ethan struck the man once across the temple with the pistol and left him unconscious in the drift. The cab doors of the Snowcat were already opening. The driver jumped down first, broad-shouldered in insulated overalls, sidearm out, using the machine body for cover. The second man stayed inside a heartbeat longer, then emerged from the passenger's side carrying a compact rifle, city posture, clean movement, shaved head beneath a wool cap. Ethan recognized him from Mara's photograph. One of Hargrove's partners. Not local. The kind of man who outsourced conscience years ago and called it professionalism. The driver fired blind into the storm. Ethan ducked behind the buried trailer tongue. Bullets punched through the metal panel and sent shards into his cheek. Ghost circled right without command, using the wideout and the wrecked trailer as cover, exactly as trained and smarter than most men alive. Ethan needed the rifleman's eyes off that side. He grabbed a loose tow chain from the trailer hitch, whipped it high over the buried wheel assembly, and yanked hard. The chain clanged violently against steel on the machine's left side. The rifleman snapped toward the noise. Ethan fired from the opposite angle and hit the driver high in the thigh. The man went down cursing, pistol lost in the snow. Then Ghost hit the rifleman from the blind side. Even ready men are never ready for 65 pounds of tactical dog launched into the neck and shoulder out of a blizzard. The rifle went off wild into the dark. The man staggered, trying to wrench free, but Ghost had the K9 jacket straps and balance to his advantage, all weight and fury and trained commitment. Ethan crossed the distance and drove the shotgun stock into the rifleman's sternum, then again into his jaw when he folded. The man collapsed against the Snowcat tread and slid down, clawing for breath. Ghost held position over him, eyes bright as ice. The wounded driver had gotten to a knee and was reaching under the cab. Ethan shot once into the snow by his hand. The man froze. Ethan kicked a metal toolbox away from him and saw the sawn-off shotgun hidden there. "Don't," he said, and the voice that came out belonged to the version of him Mara had always seen too clearly. The driver let his hand fall. The trailer door was padlocked from the outside. Ethan shot the lock and pulled it open. The smell hit first. Fuel, fear, sweat, wet wool. Then the light from his flashlight found faces, 5 of them, huddled together under blankets and cargo netting, eyes blown wide in the dark. A middle-aged man. 2 young women. A boy no older than 14. And tied against the forward wall with her hands in front of her and a bruise splitting across her cheekbone, Nurse Claire Bennett. For a moment Ethan only stared. She should have been at the cabin ridge. She should have had the upload complete and been on the floor with Anna and the others waiting for daylight. Instead she was here, breath steaming hard, trying not to let the relief of seeing him become panic. "They came from the back," she said, voice cracked. 2 more. "I thought they were county helping. They took me before I could get inside." Ethan cut her loose first. "Upload?" She nodded once. "Finished. Sent to 3 places. State investigator, federal tip line, and a reporter in Billings Mara trusted." Good. Better than good. It meant the truth was moving already, independent of whether Ethan walked off this mountain. He cut the others free, one by one, and got them out into the lee of the trailer where the wind was less brutal. Claire took over instantly, checking hands, eyes, breaths, the way competent people do when terror has to wait. Ethan covered the road and looked at the rifleman in the snow. The shaved-head man had recovered enough to prop himself against the tread. Blood ran from his mouth when he smiled. "You think files matter? You think anybody cares what happens in a dead town under 6 feet of snow?" Ethan took one step closer. Mara cared. The man wiped blood from his chin with the back of his glove. "Your wife should have kept teaching school." That sentence landed harder than a confession. Ethan moved before thought, one hand closing on the man's coat and slamming him against the tread hard enough to rattle his teeth. Ghost growled low, feeling the change in him. Claire's voice cut through the wind from behind. "Ethan." He held the man there 1 second more, long enough for the urge in his hands to become visible to himself. Then he let go. "Who gave the order?" he asked. The man laughed brokenly. "You already know. Hargrove ordered it. He approved it. Who didn't want her alive?" Silence. Ethan drew Mara's pendant from his pocket and held it where the man could see. She fought, didn't she? Still silence. Then the man looked at the pendant, looked away, and said, She woke up in the clinic. Claire closed her eyes. She had known that part. Not what came next. The man swallowed blood. She heard enough. Daniel didn't want to do it there. Too messy. So Finch did. Finch, Ethan repeated. The driver in the snow let out a tiny sound that was almost a prayer not to be included. The rifleman sneered through split lips. County coroner. Funny, right? Man signs the papers before he makes the bodies fit them. The world narrowed. Not because Ethan had not believed Mara was murdered. Because now the mechanism had a face. Coroner Finch. Sheriff Hargrove. Hidden route. Clinic logs. Money. Witnesses and trailers. All of it tied together with local power and winter isolation, the oldest cover in a mountain town where storms could explain anything and dead outsiders could disappear into snowfall and paperwork. Claire stepped beside Ethan, pale and furious. Finch was on shift that night, she whispered. He certified her without letting me back in the room. Ethan looked west, toward where the road descended through the pass and eventually reached the county line. The storm still raged, but dawn was somewhere behind it now, trying to happen. If he took the captives back to the cabin, they risked another attack. If he pushed them down the road, they might freeze. If he waited, Hargrove's remaining partners could regroup. He needed law that wasn't bought, or witnesses that couldn't be buried, or both. Then Ghost barked once toward the eastern bend. Vehicles. More than one. Claire heard them too. County? Maybe. Ethan listened. Not the loose rattle of pickup suspensions. Heavier. One engine with chains slap. Another with the high turbine whine of state snow equipment. Then, faint through the storm, a siren tone, cut short, then sounded again. Claire looked at him, hardly daring it. Could be state. Could be Hargrove's friends pretending. He had been lied to too many times to hand hope the wheel too quickly. Still, he moved fast. He zip-tied the driver and rifleman together through the buried tow ring, leaving them in full view beside the immobilized snowcat. He gave Claire the pistol. He handed the older captive a flare, and told him to fire only on command. He put the women and children behind the trailer, out of any opening volley line. Then he climbed onto the snowcat blade with the evidence bag slung high, and Ghost at his side like a white statue carved out of blizzard light. The first headlights that appeared through the cut were amber and blue. Not county. State emergency lighting. The second pair behind them rode higher and slower, a Montana Highway Patrol snow unit. The third was a county ambulance with chains on the rear wheels. It stopped well back, uncertain. A loudspeaker crackled through the wind. This is Montana State Patrol. Drop your weapons and identify yourself. Ethan looked down at the shotgun in his hands, then at Claire below him, then at the 5 captives in the snow, the immobilized route machine, the tied traffickers, the evidence under his coat, and the dog who had found the first break in the grave. For 6 months he had been the widower everyone pitied, tolerated, dismissed, or manipulated. For one wild frozen night he had become the thing the town feared he might be if he ever stopped grieving and started seeing clearly. He lowered the shotgun and set it on the blade where they could see it. Then he raised both gloved hands and shouted into the storm. Retired Navy SEAL Ethan Cole. Human trafficking route. Corrupt county officials. Multiple live witnesses. Armed suspects secured. Evidence in my possession. And if Sheriff Daniel Hargrove tells you otherwise, check under my wife's grave. Even through the wind he heard the pause that followed. Not confusion. The human pause when reality arrives too strangely shaped to fit expectations. Then men in state gear began spilling from the vehicles, weapons out, moving in disciplined arcs unlike the county boys on Ethan's ridge. Good. Real enough. One trooper reached the tied rifleman first, saw the compact weapon, the trailer, the captives, and started shouting for medics and additional units. Another came to the snowcat blade and looked up at Ethan. Younger than Ethan expected, frost on his lashes, face trying not to show shock. "Sir, slowly step down." Ethan did. The trooper's gaze shifted to Ghost. "Dog under control?" Ghost sat immediately at Ethan's heel. "Yes," Ethan said. That answer settled something in the trooper's face. He nodded once, then took Ethan's shotgun and sidearm, not roughly, just by procedure. "We need the evidence. You'll get copies and originals. You don't trust us." "No," Ethan said. "But I'm learning." The trooper almost smiled despite the moment. Then he ushered Ethan toward the road shoulder where another officer had already put Claire under a thermal blanket and started taking names from the captives. In the wash of rotating lights and wind-blown snow, the scene transformed from hunted silence into official chaos. Radios screamed. Medics moved. Cameras clicked. 2 state investigators arrived in the second unit and went straight to the trailer, then to Ethan when a trooper pointed him out. The older of the investigators, a woman with a square jaw and weathered face, introduced herself as Special Agent Nora Delaney from the Montana Division of Criminal Investigation. She did not waste time on condolences or theatrics. "You said evidence in possession." Ethan handed over the first flash drive and the waterproof bundle from his coat one piece at a time while Claire added the clinic drive and her own verbal statement. Delaney listened without interrupting, asked only precise questions, and the more she heard, the less emotion showed on her face, which Ethan respected because real outrage doesn't always perform itself. "Sheriff Hargrove?" she asked. "Alive. Secured at the feed mill tunnel entrance unless one of his people got him loose." Delaney turned to 3 troopers. "Get me a tactical team at the mill and another at the cemetery. Nobody from Blackridge County goes near those scenes without my clearance." A county deputy near the ambulance started protesting. Delaney cut him off with a look sharp enough to freeze steam. "Not one step. Not one file. Not one radio call. You understand me?" He understood. The pass filled steadily with more units as dawn tried to burn through the clouds in a weak gray smear. Hargrove's route had been stopped, but the town below still had men in uniforms and offices that could hide records, burn paper, intimidate locals, and pretend innocence. Delaney knew it too. She listened to Claire's account of Mara arriving alive at the clinic, then took 3 steps away and placed a call that had the clipped urgency of warrants in progress. When she came back, her eyes were colder than the weather. "Coroner Finch is being detained. County clinic is locked down. We've also got a judge authorizing emergency seizure of county records due to probable destruction risk." Claire sat down hard on the snowcat tread and covered her face with both hands. It wasn't relief exactly. Relief implies something is over. This was more like a body finally permitting itself to believe the nightmare had witnesses now. Ethan stood with Ghost pressed to his leg and watched the light grow by degrees over the pass, flattening the storm from pure darkness into shape and contour. The mountain that had hidden so much all night now revealed bits of itself grudgingly. The cut road, the black firs, the buried guardrails, the blood in the snow where men had learned too late that winter was not on their side. He expected to feel triumph. Instead he felt tired in a way older than exhaustion, the kind that lives in marrow. Mara was still dead. Exposing the men who killed her would not change that. But truth has weight of its own, and at last it was no longer his alone to carry. Delaney approached again, softer this time but not gentle enough to insult him. "Mr. Cole, I need you to come into town with us after the medics clear everyone. Statement, scene walk, identification of the tunnel. We'll likely be doing this all day." "All day is fine." She glanced at Ghost. "Dog too?" "He stays. We can work with that." By 7:15 the road to Blackridge had become a moving chain of enforcement vehicles, medics, and one state evidence truck inching its way through the storm. Ethan rode in the second snow unit with Ghost in the rear compartment, and Claire beside him under 2 blankets, sipping bad coffee from a patrol thermos with hands that still shook. She looked out at the town as they descended and said, almost to herself, "It's going to look normal." He knew what she meant before they entered the first street. Blackridge in morning snow was heartbreakingly ordinary. Church steeple white with frost. Main Street awnings bowed under drifts. Diner sign half lit. School parking lot empty. Smoke from chimneys. It looked like the sort of place people in cities romanticized when they wanted to believe small towns were morally simple. That illusion died fast once the convoy turned not toward the sheriff's office first but toward the clinic, where state units already blocked the rear lot and 2 men in cuffs stood by the loading entrance with blankets around their shoulders. One of them was Coroner Finch. Ethan recognized him instantly. Tidied beard, rimless glasses, face of a man who could deliver sympathy to families by the dozen and sleep afterwards. Finch saw Ethan through the windshield and went visibly pale. Good. Men like that should be forced to meet the eyes of the lives they sorted into paperwork. The snow unit rolled on to the feed mill where another cluster of investigators and troopers swarmed the yard. Hargrove was indeed alive, dragged out from the side chamber in cuffs, jaw swollen, one cheek torn where Ghost had taken him. He stood under guard beside an unmarked DCI vehicle, coat open, hands bound, trying to maintain the posture of a sheriff whose authority still existed if everyone would just remember their lines. Then he saw Ethan step down from the vehicle. There are many kinds of defeat. Some are loud. Some are legal. The deepest one is public moral collapse. Hargrove stood in daylight, not hidden in a tunnel, not cushioned by his office, not protected by local habit, but in front of state agents, troopers, witnesses, and his own townspeople beginning to gather at the street barricades in heavy coats and stunned silence. He opened his mouth as if to say something. Maybe another lie. Maybe another version of necessity. Maybe some speech about preserving Blackridge, about jobs, about winter, about outsiders who didn't understand how hard mountain life could be. He got no chance. June, wrapped in a patrol blanket and standing with medics nearby, saw him and pointed with a hand that shook from more than cold. That one, she said in a voice that carried farther than her size suggested. He chose the girls. The whole yard changed. Not just legally. Socially. The gathered townspeople heard it. Lev heard it. Anna heard it. Claire heard it. And because truth, once spoken aloud in the right moment, can spread faster than any cover story, the murmuring along the barricade moved like wine through dead grass. Sheriff. Girls. Route. Grave. Mara. Alive at clinic. Tunnel. Feed mill. Words leaping from mouth to mouth as the mountain town woke up and discovered itself reflected in something rotten. Hargrove tried then. These people are being manipulated. Cole is unstable. His wife's death. Ethan said nothing. He did not need to. Claire stepped forward before anyone else could stop her. I treated Mara Cole the night you brought her into my trauma room, she said, voice raw but steady. She was alive. You ordered me out. When I came back, she was dead. I copied the logs. I copied the video. You don't get to speak for her anymore. That was the blow, more than cuffs, more than evidence bags, more than troopers. A local woman, known and ordinary and credible, saying it where everybody could hear. Hargrove's face lost whatever remained of public authority. He looked, for the first time, afraid. By mid-morning the cemetery ridge was swarming with investigators in insulated suits, photographing the collapsed grave shaft, measuring supports, mapping the tunnel line under the mountain. Ethan walked the scene with Delaney and 2 forensic techs, showing them exactly where Ghost had first dug, where the boards gave way, where the chamber held the lockbox and Mara's pendant, where the holding cells branched off, where the body of Cal had lain before removal. Every step reopened the night in fragments, Ghost's growl, the hollow earth, the stale air under the grave. But now those moments were no longer unbelievable private horrors. They were catalogued, measured, logged. The state had words for all of it. Homicide conspiracy. Trafficking. Official misconduct. Evidence tampering. False certification. Kidnapping. Maybe even more once they untangled the route beyond county lines. At the chamber bench, one of the techs bagged the freezer-wrapped ledger and looked up at Ethan. Your dog really found this? Ghost, standing near the threshold in his black tactical K9 jacket now stiff with frozen blood and snow, lifted his head at the sound of Ethan's voice. "He did," Ethan said. The tech let out the kind of disbelieving whistle people use when reality exceeds the ordinary shape of stories. "Hell of a dog." Ethan looked at Ghost longer than necessary. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He is." The walkthrough ended back at the grave where Mara's headstone had been stabilized by braces and a tent fly while forensics worked around it. Delaney took off one glove and rubbed her hands together for warmth. "There's going to be press," she said. "There's going to be political heat. Maybe federal coordination if the route crosses enough lines. You don't owe anybody a performance. But people will ask." "I know." She looked at the grave, then at him. "Your wife did something extraordinary." He stared at Mara's name under the frost. "She did something she knew was right." Delaney gave a small nod, the kind professionals exchange when sentiment would cheapen the truth. "That too." By noon, Blackridge no longer looked normal. Satellite vans had started inching into town. County offices were sealed. The clinic's rear wing was locked under state warrant. A judge from Helena joined by video to authorize deeper seizure of county communications. Townspeople gathered in knots outside the diner and church, speaking in shocked bursts, some crying, some furious, some refusing to believe and then failing to keep refusing as more details surfaced. One deputy tried resigning on the spot. Another asked for counsel before anyone had accused him of more than procedure violations. Pastor Tom Weller came to Ethan outside the command post in front of the feed mill, and stood hat in hands like a man at the edge of a confession too late to save him. "I told myself I was preventing violence," Tom said, eyes rimmed red. "When Hargrove asked me to come up the ridge, I thought maybe I could talk you down before somebody died." Ethan looked at him without helping. "And when you buried Mara?" Tom shut his eyes. "I knew something was wrong." "Not what?" "Not this. But wrong. And I chose peace over truth because that's what cowards call it when they want to keep their place." The words were honest enough to hurt. Ethan could have answered in several ways. Instead he said, "Then tell the truth now." Tom nodded once, hard, as if accepting a sentence, and walked toward the state investigators to give his statement. That afternoon turned into a long machinery of justice beginning to move. Statements. Identifications. Medical exams. Photos. Maps. Delaney kept Ethan close but not trapped, understanding that people who survive nights like this need room to breathe between interrogations. Claire gave her formal account in a heated trailer while Anna, Lev, Mateo, and June were placed with federal victim advocates brought in from Billings. When Ethan checked on them, June surprised him by standing and hugging him with all the fierce thin force she had. "For your wife," she whispered. Anna repeated it later, not as comfort but as recognition. Lev, who had prayed through fear all night, clasped Ethan's forearm with both hands and said in a graveled accent, "Some dead still fight." Ethan did not trust himself to answer any of them with more than a nod. By late afternoon the storm finally began to loosen. Not clear, but weakened enough for the town to re-emerge in shape and color beneath the white. The state had Hargrove moved to an armored transport. Finch too. 2 more names surfaced from the ledger and clinic logs, both county maintenance men. Search warrants went out. A reporter in Billings published the first online piece before sunset with a headline Ethan would not read until much later because he had no appetite for public language around private grief. The only headline that mattered to him stood in a sealed evidence room on a drive, and in a morgue record now finally being corrected. Mara Cole had not died in an accident. She had been silenced. Just before evening, Delaney found Ethan near the cemetery gate where the ridge looked down over Blackridge, all of it turning blue under the oncoming cold. Ghost lay at his feet, finally sleeping for minutes at a time, one ear still half-cocked to the world. Delaney held a file folder but did not open it. "Preliminary review from State Forensic Path," she said. "They're amending the manner of death. Homicide." He had known. Still, Hearing the words spoken by authority made something inside him loosen and tear at the same time. Not because it was new, but because certainty carries its own pain. There will be hearings, Delaney went on. Trials. Defense lawyers trying to drag your wife through mud because they have nothing else. I'm telling you now so you're not surprised later. All right. You want to know the one thing we already have that they can't explain away? He looked at her. She gave the smallest glance toward Ghost. The timeline. Your dog alerted before any of us knew there was a tunnel. Before any warrant. Before any scene staging. That matters. It puts discovery outside contamination arguments. One clean line. Your dog found the first truth. Ethan looked down at Ghost, at the white fur now cleaned in patches and still stained in others, at the tactical jacket scarred by claws and ice. Ghost opened one eye, judged that Ethan was standing there, and closed it again. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. He usually does. When the last investigators left the grave for the day, they offered to relocate Mara's remains temporarily because of the collapsed shaft and evidence contamination. Ethan refused at first out of instinct, then reconsidered. Justice was not sentimentality. If moving her was what the process required to make the case airtight, then keeping her there for his own feelings would only let the men who used her grave as cover continue shaping the terms. He signed the form with a steady hand. The exhumation would happen respectfully in the morning under state supervision. Mara would be reburied after, this time not on top of a secret and not under a lie. Night came again, gentler than the last one but still winter-hard, and Blackridge glowed under portable floodlights and patrol beams. Ethan returned to the cabin only after Delaney practically ordered him to sleep. Claire was there ahead of him, having refused a motel room in town and chosen instead to sit by the stove with a cup of tea and the old courage people mistake for fragility. Anna and the others had been moved to safe lodging under protection. The cabin felt emptier for it, but safer. Real safety, not the temporary kind. Claire stood when Ethan came in, then stopped awkwardly as if unsure whether this house was still more hers than his by virtue of Mara's memory. Ethan spared them both the hesitation and set another log in the stove before taking off his coat. Ghost circled twice by the hearth and collapsed with a groan so deep it almost sounded human. He saved my life twice, Claire said softly. Ethan looked at the dog and then at the scarf still hanging by the chair. He's been doing that for a while. Claire followed his gaze to the scarf. Mara used to say you pretended not to need anyone so often you started believing it. A weaker man might have laughed that away. Ethan sat heavily in the chair across from the fire and let the heat find him inch by inch. She said that to a lot of people? Just me. And once, after too much wine, she said you carried grief before grief ever had a reason. He stared at the flames. That sounded exactly like Mara, to understand a person cruelly well and love them without turning the understanding into a weapon. Claire wrapped both hands around her cup. I'm sorry I waited. You were surviving. So were you. He nodded once. That was enough. Silence settled, but this time it was not the crawling, weighted thing from before. It was tired silence. Shared silence. The kind that leaves room for a person to remain themselves. Near midnight Ethan stood and took Mara's pendant from his pocket. The chain had been broken by rough hands, but the lily engraving was still clear. He cleaned the blood from it with warm water and a cloth, then set it beside the scarf on the chair. Claire watched without speaking. Ghost lifted his head and thumped his tail once. The next morning dawned cold and brutally bright, the storm having finally exhausted itself. Sunlight hit the mountain like revelation, showing every track, every scar, every disturbed drift from the night before. Blackridge looked smaller in clear weather, less mythical, more accountable. State crews were already at the cemetery when Ethan arrived with Ghost and Claire. The exhumation was quiet, professional, dignified. Mara's casket was raised, documented, and moved to a temporary secure transport. Ethan stood through it all without stepping back. A few townspeople watched from the road, hats in hands, shame playing on more than one face. When the work finished, Delaney approached with an evidence receipt and a date for a memorial reburial once the scene was released. "There's something else," she said. "Federal Victim Services wants to know whether you'd be willing to speak to some of the rescued people later." "Not today." "Eventually. They see you as part of the reason they're alive." Ethan looked at the mountains. "The reason they're alive is her." Delaney didn't argue. "Then maybe say that." By afternoon, Blackridge had entered the phase every scandal enters after exposure, denial giving way to sorting. Some residents confessed what they suspected and never said. Some swore they knew nothing and maybe that was true. Some clung to Hargrove's line and called him a man who did hard things for a hard town. Those people got fewer by the hour as evidence reached news outlets and the first clinic video still surfaced publicly, grainy, time-stamped, enough to prove Mara had been alive on arrival. Finch's lawyer resigned before sunset. Hargrove was transferred out of county jurisdiction. Pastor Weller announced an evening prayer service not for peace, but for truth. That change alone told Ethan the town might yet choose a different future. 3 days later, when the road was fully open and the reporters had multiplied, Ethan stood in a suit he hated beside a new grave on the same ridge. The state had cleared the site, reinforced the ground, collapsed and filled the tunnel access, and moved Mara to a higher plot under open pine and sky. No hidden chamber. No lie under the frost. Just mountain, wind, and the people who had loved her enough to show up in the cold. Anna was there. Lev too, arm in a sling from a later medical procedure. June stood with a victim advocate and held a white flower with both hands. Claire stood near the back, red hair loose in the sun, eyes swollen from a grief she had not been allowed to show until now. Pastor Weller read the words this time like a man who knew exactly what they cost. Ethan did not speak until the end. He had spent most of his life avoiding public language because words are easy and actions are not. But when he looked at Mara's new headstone and then down at Ghost sitting perfectly still beside him in his black tactical K9 jacket, the truth came clean. "My wife did not die because winter was cruel," he said, voice carrying over the gathered silence. "Winter was only the cover cowards used. She died because she saw people being treated as disposable and refused to look away. She died because men with power believed a storm could hide what they were. They were wrong." He paused, one hand resting on Ghost's neck. "This dog found the first crack in the lie. The rest of us just finally followed him." No one applauded. It wasn't that kind of moment. But more than one person cried openly, and in a mountain town where emotional restraint had long been mistaken for integrity, that meant something. After the service, people came one by one. Some to apologize. Some to thank him. Some only to stand awkwardly near the grave and admit they had failed Mara by trusting the wrong men. Ethan took what he could and let the rest be what it was. Emotional justice isn't a crowd chanting your name. It's smaller and harder. It's a town forced to see clearly. It's guilty men in custody. It's death records corrected. It's witnesses alive. It's the removal of a lie from the exact place it was planted. By the time the ridge cleared, the light had gone gold over the snowfields. Claire remained long enough to leave a single lily pendant charm at the base of the headstone, a quiet answer to the one Ethan had recovered. Then she walked back to the road without asking for anything more. Ghost watched her go, then returned his attention to Ethan. At last they were alone. The wind moved gently through the pines. Far below, Blackridge looked different now. Still small. Still winter-worn. Still carrying the same streets and church and mill and clinic. But something rotten had been dragged out from under it, and though towns do not heal quickly, they do sometimes begin. Ethan crouched in front of the grave and brushed a little drifted snow from Mara's name. He set the clean pendant chain across the base of the stone, just for a minute, just long enough to feel that he had brought something back to where it belonged. Then he picked it up again and closed it in his fist. "I found it," he said softly, the words almost lost in the mountain air. "He found it first. But I found it. Ghost moved closer and leaned his shoulder into Ethan's arm with the unembarrassed certainty dogs have about grief and love and the fact that both can exist at once. Ethan stayed there until the cold reached through the knees of his pants and the sky went from gold to blue. Not because he was trapped by the past. Because for the first time since Mara died, standing at her grave no longer felt like standing inside a question. The answer had come, terrible and necessary. The men who mocked, dismissed, and manipulated had been humbled publicly. The hidden route was broken. The dead had been named honestly. The living had been saved. And beside him, the white German shepherd who had clawed open the first seam in the darkness sat watch over the silence like a promise kept. When Ethan finally rose, Ghost stood with him immediately, alert and ready, as if there might still be one more task before nightfall. Ethan looked down, and despite everything, a tired half-smile touched his mouth. "Come on," he said. The dog fell into step at his side. Together they walked down from the grave through the clean winter light, leaving behind not sorrow, not vengeance, but the one thing the storm had failed to bury, the truth.